Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin, and my buddy, James Junkin. Hello, James.
Roll Tide, baby.
Roll Tide.
Hater gonna hate. That's all I gotta say. Hater gonna hate.
Well, let's just keep winning games, right,
That's it.
buddy? Let's just keep
That's it.
winning games. So
That's it.
here we are again. Our last episode, we talked a lot about roofing contractors because they came up with in the OSHA top 10 quite a lot. You mentioned a lot of the citations were there. I'm not sure if there was an emphasis program or not. I think maybe you referenced that there might have been. But ripped from the headlines today, James, tell us a little bit about a roofing contractor that didn't have such a great day.
Well, it's a Jacksonville, Florida roofing contractor. They're facing more than $750,000 in proposed penalties after two inspections, all related to repeatedly exposing workers to fall hazards. And this is in residential construction. Now, the initial uh, investigation, I guess, may have been program investigation, but 2 licks later, they had another investigation, that began or an inspection that began as the result of a worker that fell, from a residential roof while, removing skylight fixtures. So they had an initial inspection, then they had another inspection, and it looks like, OSHA's coming in with willful citations, repeat citations, serious and 2 other than serious citations. So I think there's a lot that you can draw from that based on what we talked about last week, the top 10, the emphasis program. Uh, if I am a hiring client and I'm hiring contractors to do work, make sure that those contractors are adequately protecting those workers. They have the right training, they have the right gear, but you could very easily get into an OSHA multi-employer citation situation here if this was a contractor of yours, and definitely gross negligence claims for the workers that were injured, and should anybody die, unfortunately, wrongful death.
So what you're talking about, James, is subcontractor management, which our sponsor and our company that makes this possible for our listeners is Veriforce, and that's exactly what they do. Is they help people manage their subcontractors, taking looks at audits, looking at these documents, and making sure they have the right insurance, which is all things we should be doing with clients that work for general contractors so that they don't get into those multi-employer situations. Um, so let's shout out to Veriforce. Thanks for propelling us every day on this podcast. And here we go. Let's talk today about one of the things that we talked about on our last podcast on several of the top 10, and that is training.
Training, training. You know, in the assessments that I've done on behalf of several different hiring clients and large contractors over the past, I don't know, 2, 3 years, I see a reoccurring trend. And that trend is that basically only 5% of contractors that we're assessing are really doing training as outlined by OSHA in the OSHA standards. Doesn't mean they're not doing training. It just means they're not doing training in the depth and frequency necessary to comply with OSHA. Uh, it's very shocking that most training that's being conducted is really what we would classify, Dr. Martin, between you and I, awareness level, general safety training, not specific to the task that's being performed by the workers. And you saw that reflected in OSHA Top 10 when we talked about fall protection training, powered industrial truck training. And I think part of that is just really a lack of knowledge by safety professionals and management as to what the requirements are. They see e-learning courses offered. There's a whole list of topics.
It's
Uh,
got the right name at the top.
the right name at the top. Many contractors we're assessing, HR is deciding what the training programs are. And so because it says this right here, bam, let's go take it. That's going to meet the requirements, only to find out that it doesn't.
Right.
It does.
Right. So, I mean, and again, in the construction industry, what I see a lot is OSHA 10 and OSHA 30. They think they're one and done. Um, in the construction industry, a lot we see OSHA 10 as the one thing that gains you access to a site is to have that OSHA 10 card, but it's not meant to be training in the sense of what OSHA requires for training for individual subjects like fall protection, lockout, tagout, silica, lead awareness, all those other things that we need to have actual targeted training for that has information that a lot of times is called out in the standard.
You know, I think probably one of the biggest misconceptions is that OSHA requires you to have the 10 or the 30 hours. OSHA doesn't require you at all to have the OSHA 10 or OSHA 30. Typically, those are used as general safety awareness orientation courses, fundamental courses for entry level workers and workers that are going to go perform tasks on someone else's job site, right? And that's very similar to what you see in the oil and gas industry with the Safe Land courses like Veriforce's Basic 7.0. But these courses are not required by OSHA. In fact, it says in the train the trainer documentation for those that conduct general industry training, the OSHA 501, and construction, the OSHA 500, right on the train the trainer packet, these courses are not meant to satisfy any training requirement in any OSHA standard, period.
So if you're using those things to cover you for PPE, for fall protection, even though they're covered in the OSHA 10 or OSHA 30, it's not allowed. You can't be double dipping on your training. My feeling, I love the OSHA 10, OSHA 30. I used to be an
Absolutely.
authorized instructor. I think it's a really good idea that everybody has it. However, I would rather see a robust needs assessment done by a company and targeted training being given to workers rather than just an OSHA 10, OSHA 30, thinking then that's good enough. I'd rather see a needs assessment. I'd rather see targeted training. And I can do without the OSHA 10 or OSHA 30 as long as they're being trained on the topics that are most hazardous to their work.
So I think what happens is because I work with a lot of contractors across various industries across the United States. A lot of things are very hiring client driven. And I hear this all the time when we do assessments. But James, my hiring client didn't tell me I had to do this. They told me we needed all of our workers trained in OSHA 10 and all of our workers trained in OSHA 30. My hiring client, they just told us all we had to have was the Safe Land course, Veriforce's Basic 7.0, right? And those are all great programs. I don't want to denigrate those programs at all. But in addition to your hiring client making those as minimal access safety fundamentals classes that you must have, you also have to abide by the law. And OSHA is the law, whether your hiring client tells you to abide by the law or not. And they do in your MSA, where it says you will abide by all federal, state, local regulations. And this is where the rub comes in. There's a lack of misunderstanding of what's going on when you this between this contractor and hiring client relationship. The
So
hiring client is not your safety mom and dad. Okay. Their
unless
attorneys are
unless
not going
unless
to
they're
let
gonna pay your insurance, right, so
you.
that your
Absolutely.
insurance pays out in the case of an accident, or unless they're gonna actually, pay your fines if OSHA comes on site and they tag you for a training violation, don't rely on 'em for anything more than telling you the bare minimum. You are responsible as an
Absolutely.
employer to outline the training that your workers need based on your work and your hazardous tasks.
The Without getting into the multi-employer citation policy, which is about as clear as mud, in the basic understanding and direct reading of the standard, it always says the employer shall, the employer shall, the employer shall. So for liability purposes, many hiring clients are not going to come down there and make your training matrix for you. They're not going to tell you Well, a laborer needs this training. A person operating a forklift needs this training. A person operating a forklift may need a whole host of training. Things like access to medical records. They may need, if they're trained to perform first aid and have to perform first aid and bloodborne pathogens. They may also need HAZCOM. They may also need fire extinguisher training because all those come with fire extinguishers, right? And some of those have annual training requirements. So I think it's important for safety professionals to really drill down into what the training requirements are. And fortunately, OSHA has given us a quick and easy guide to do it in a form of OSHA publication 2254.
Okay, tell us a little bit about OSHA 2254 because you've mentioned this several times on our program. I know what it is, but 2254, you know the title, exact title of that? It's the training booklet guidance that they put out that outlines all of the required training by OSHA. Now, is that all that's ever required?
No, there may be other trainings that are required. Things like NFPA 70E, that may be required. But I think you got to go back and really just look at a training needs assessment. What everyone's looking for is the easy button when it comes to training. And there's no easy button when it comes to training, just like there's no easy button when it comes to uh, implementing any type of safety management system. Things I commonly see. Okay. Well, James, we train through our safety meetings. Really, bro?
You can reinforce through your safety
Okay.
meeting.
Now, you may cover enough information for awareness level topics in your safety meeting. Here's why I challenge you not to train through your safety meetings. Safety meetings should be topical, they should be timely, they should reinforce what's going on in the field, right? If I'm training, for example, heat stress, and I do it in June, well, what happens to all the workers that get hired after June? They just don't get it till next June, and we see that pretty often in the assessments that we do, that workers are not getting adequate training because we're trying to train through safety meetings. I'll tell you something else that's not training. Here is our policies and procedures.
Read them.
You go read them, sign, and turn them back. OSHA said that read and sign does not count as training. That's not training. So I think you got to begin with a needs assessment. What is training is required? So, Doc, you're an expert in educational design and things of that nature. How would you recommend people to conduct a needs assessment for the training that's required?
So I'm not gonna go into curriculum and design here. I'm just gonna say let's do the down and dirty common sense approach.
Okay,
And that is, who best knows about the work that you do and the hazards of that work? The
the
workers,
work.
the workers, the owners, uh, the people that work with you every day, possibly. Those are the people that you need to be talking to as a safety professional or anybody who's doing a needs assessment, whether it's HR or safety or operations, right? You need to be looking critically at all of the tests that you do and what are the hazards, right? Then the next thing that you need to do is who's exposed in your work, right? What are the labor categories? Are laborers exposed to the same thing as a mason would be? Are laborers the same as carpenters? As are people in construction the same as general industry? What are those people doing on an everyday basis? And what could they be doing? What could they be around that also might be a hazard, right? That's the crux of building a needs assessment.
Task hazards and exposure. Task hazards and exposure. You know,
And personnel, I'm gonna throw personnel in there, right? Because you're gonna match the personnel to what they need. Now, the best way to do that is if you have a smaller company, everybody gets trained on everything.
right?
That may not be feasible If you have a large company and you've got thousands of employees that need to be doing work every day and they're not all doing the same task, right? That's where the needs assessment becomes more complex.
So I like to do them in spreadsheets based on the organizational chart of what the workers, the job description of the workers or whatever their job title is initially, and drill down from there. Um, this is not easy. It's very complex. And so, well, another way that you could go about this is take the publication and at the top of the spreadsheet, list out what all the OSHA required trainings are and those that have annual refreshers or refreshers every 3 years, like, well, it's not really a refresher. I misspoke, but like the performance evaluations for powered industrial trucks. But on one top of the spreadsheet, we have the standard. Then on the other axis of the spreadsheet, we have the job description or the job title, right? And you when you go down through there and you have it in front of you, it becomes very daunting at all the training you have to have. So things like this, for example, emergency action plan. Who in the company doesn't need emergency action plan training?
Everyone.
Everyone, right? A lot of the times we see emergency action plan training when they submit it to us for verification of that training, it's some generic training that they've taken online. And again, online training has its place, but that's not going to give me the specifics of what I need to do in the event that we have a fire, earthquake, hurricane, tornado, active shooter. Okay.
Right. Right.
Emergency
Now,
action plan.
what you spelled out on your spreadsheet, putting the list of things at the top and the personnel, etc. I will add to that that there are specific local, city, state requirements. So I'm going to give you an
Right.
example. For example, I do a lot of work in Boston and in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a hoisting license. Hoisting license needs a certain amount of continuing education or training that goes along with that. We also have a mandatory within the city and with many of the bigger cities in Massachusetts, they also have mandatory hot work training that you have to take. And some of that can be through the NFPA, some of it can be through the city. Sometimes if you're working along a railroad, you need to have certain railroad training, you need to have flagger training. So these are things that you have to be considering when you're near hazards as well as exposed to specific hazards of your work qualified in the OSHA regulations, right? Because these are also law. These are also
Absolutely.
state and local ordinances or state and local laws.
Absolutely. And just throw Cal OSHA in there. Give you an example. Cal OSHA has a workplace violence prevention standard. And there's training for workers, there's training for supervisors, just like in the heat illness prevention standard. Um, there's training that's required there for workers, for supervisors. So know where you are and what training is applicable to you for your organization. And that just begins sitting down and creating a needs assessment.
Right. Connecticut has a sexual harassment standard training
See
that's
there?
required.
So those of you with state plans understand that more training may be required. But here's some that come up all the time. And some in recent assessments I've done. Occupational noise exposure. We go to the job site, workers are wearing hearing protection. It's kind of noisy, right? We pull out the old iPhone, download the NIOSH app, and we're sitting at, 87, 88 in dBA in that particular area. Those workers need to be trained. If they're going to wear hearing protection, they need to be trained and be part of a hearing conservation program. Um, Trying to think of some other ones. PPE. Do you have documented PPE training? And some folks say, well, this is just common sense. Well, there's nothing common sense about sitting across from an OSHA area director in an informal conference and trying to get them to claw back these citations that they've issued related to PPE, right? You've got to have specific training when it comes to PPE. Dr. Martin talked about this in our last episode when we talked about those citations. how to select it, how to care for it, don it, doff it, put it on, take it off, when to discard it. Specific requirements when it comes to personal protective equipment. Uh,
I
Here's
will
one
say
that
this too, James, while we're on personal protective equipment, that when you're doing your site inspections, make sure you're following up, that people are following the training that they've received. For example, if you're wearing respirators in a dusty environment, you're not taking it off at the end of the day and putting it back in the clean bag with the dust all over it, right? Because certainly if they were trained, that's not how they were trained, hopefully. And if they were trained that way, they're not doing it right and they need to be retrained.
absolutely. Now, in the construction standard, you correct me if I'm wrong, when we're talking about training requirements for first aid, that has to be they actually call out the American Red Cross. I think there's another one for MSHA inside that standard. Definitely nationally recognized and definitely indicating that program denotes some type of performance type activities. I don't know, in my opinion, that watching 30-minute video is gonna be enough to satisfy the intent, the spirit of OSHA's regulation in the construction standard.
Well, so on the construction standard, a lot of the first aid information is based on the distance to emergency services, right? How long is it going to take emergency services to respond? And I talk with my clients a lot about this. Do we need to train first aiders? Do we not need to train first aiders? And working in the city, one would hope that an ambulance can get anywhere within the city within 15 minutes. But what if not, right? And then if you have to have first aid training, you also have to provide bloodborne pathogen training,
And
right?
refresh how often?
Every year.
Annually. BBP training has to be done annually. So even in companies that we assess that are doing training, there's a lot of annual refreshers that get missed. For example, fire extinguisher training. That training under the standard requires a hands-on component. That doesn't mean you gotta go light a fire and actually get out there and pull the pin and do the pass method and extinguish the fire. You can have a lot of different technology out there for being able to demonstrate the actual use of a fire extinguisher. But that has to be done before initial assignment and annually thereafter. Question, who needs that?
Everyone,
Everyone,
including office staff, right? Your
including
fire
office staff.
extinguishers hanging on the wall, right? For incipient
Absolutely.
fires that are in your path on the way out of a building, the office staff needs to be trained as well as emergency action plans.
Uh, Here's one that gets missed. I had a fatality investigation about 4 years ago now that this came up, 1910-177, servicing a multi-piece and single-piece rim wheels, changing tires. It has training requirements. Overhead and gantry crane operators, it has training requirements.
We don't do
And
any rigging, but then you see them using the overhead gantry crane or they're using rigging to use, with the forklifts or telehandlers in the field, that's rigging. You need rigging
uh,
training. You need signaling training.
signaling training, uh, mechanical power presses, slings for your material handling, welding, cutting, and brazing, documented training. So there's a lot that goes into this that we routinely find that workers are coming up on short on, and I'm sure we skipped a whole bunch, in just going through this. I confined space, for example, entrance attendant supervisor training, rescue training when it comes to that, crane operator training under subpart CC. What's allowed is to be a qualified rigger, what that training component looks like, electrical safety practices. So, as we're going through this, I don't want to go through every training requirement that's there in the OSHA standards. But to simplify it, if you go to OSHA publication 2254 and download it, that publication is your friend. That's how you set up a training matrix. And you'll be surprised. There's a tremendous amount of training that's required. And once you get into things like this is your area, chemicals,
There are
okay?
specific training requirements for different chemicals. You need to train on the SDS that people are using, right? Whether it's in a safety meeting or in a pre-job planning meeting, you need to train on the SDS and make sure people know what's in it. So there are a lot of nuances to this, right? And what I would say to a safety professional who's unsure of doing a needs assessment, right? Reach out to somebody who's a little bit more savvy about these things. Perhaps, James and I are always willing to help
Right.
somebody if they're having questions on training to kind of flesh out the things that you may be missing. Because if you have a task, right, almost always there will be some type of training, whether it's on the job training, whether it's OSHA required training, whether it's state or local required training. There's going to be some training required to make sure that that staff member is competent. If they're not competent, that's where injuries and fatalities and accidents occur, right? Is it and it's a big gap with people. If you don't train somebody and they don't know the hazards, you're in a whole lot of trouble if OSHA shows up, number one, or if they show up after the fact when something's already happened, because you need to make sure that you have these workers trained in the tasks that they're doing and the hazards.
And so my advice to you, download OSHA publication 2254, look at what your workers' job tasks are, the hazards are, what they're exposed to, look at the regulations, not just the federal, look at the state, look at the local, like Dr. Martin said. Get you a training matrix together and then decide how you best should go about conducting training. And just because it says whatever the regulation training is in the title does not mean it's going to meet the intent. It does not mean it's going to meet the intent. And we did a webinar on this very topic. I think in 2022, I did one for Bear Force, and it was entitled, "Can You Defend Your Training?" That's my parting word to you. Because if you get inspected by OSHA, particularly after a serious injury or fatality investigation, you're going to be defending your training. If
Know
you
what's in it?
indulge in wrongful death or a gross negligence litigation, you as the safety professional will probably be the company representative in there to defend your training. And I don't think anybody wants to go in there and try to defend 2 minutes and 56 seconds of lockout tagout training. And
That's
say
right.
that was enough for an authorized person to perform energy isolation. Uh, then the annual refreshers. Once you've got your training metric, you need to go back and see, when do I need to conduct annual refreshers? I don't think I've ever assessed a single company that's doing access to medical records right. That's upon initial assignment and annually thereafter. Most of them don't get it on initial assignment, right? But even fewer, those that
Get it
are
annually
doing
every year
do it
thereafter, right?
after,
Right.
right? And so
There are some standards that I tell my clients. They say, well, OSHA's silent on whether or not this needs to be refreshed. And, like fall protection, right? And I think, you'll see a fall protection certificate that says expires in 3 years, expires in 2 years, expires in 4 years. Well, what is the expiry date, right? Most instructors cautiously put that on there because they know that the human condition is people need to be refreshed. We're all human. We don't remember everything. It's good to get a refresher once in a while. So that's a where OSHA is silent. You need to make a decision on what's reasonable and what you can defend if OSHA comes in and asks you when were they last trained. If you say 15 years ago on personal fall arrest systems, I would say to you that in 15 years, PFAS have changed considerably, and the products that are out there and the materials that are out there that they may be using for personal fall arrest have probably changed, right? And that's going to be
absolutely.
an argument that you're going to have to make. So just make sure that you're being reasonable about your refresher requirements and making sure that people know what the requirements are and they know what the new information is.
And I'm gonna say this and end on this. If you're a contractor that hires subcontractors, Most of you have contractual language that says that the subcontractor has to conduct safety training, et cetera, and comply with all the laws. Help your subcontractors by being more specific of what your expectations are. Go and see, can they produce documentation related to fall protection training, especially the training that's all around, for example, serious injury and fatality potential. Should they be training on access to medical exposure records? Yes, but nobody's going to die because of that. But you'd be surprised how many subcontractors we assess and then find out that they have no training. They might have an OSHA 10 and that's it. And they're performing high hazard tasks like working at heights, etc. Brent Kettelkamp and I have an article in September's issue of Professional Safety Journal. Brett's an attorney with Ogletree Deacons. He serves on the Veriforce Strategic Advisory Board with us, and we talk about standard indemnification and hold harmless agreements and their inadequacy in protecting contractors uh, from subcontractor worker injury claims and hiring clients from contractor worker injury claims. One way to not get to the point where we got to get out the contract and figure out who is responsible for all this is to be proactive. Are people doing what they say they do? So start in your organization, get your training lined out, and then check to see if your subcontractors are performing the necessary training that's required by OSHA. In the final comments at the National Safety Council's Congress and Expo, when OSHA made the presentation on the top 10, they said something that's backed by data that's pretty obvious to us. The smaller the organization, the less resources they have to provide the necessary training and implementation. So that usually falls in line many times with subcontractor companies. So go check and make sure at a minimum that they're addressing training when it comes to these SIF type events.
Thanks for that, James. And to everybody in our audience, thanks again for listening to the Risk Matrix. You can find us anywhere podcasts are
We everywhere,
downloaded.
baby.
Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, anywhere that podcasts are dropped, YouTube. Veriforce has a YouTube channel. We also have a LinkedIn page for the Risk Matrix. Come see us there. Like and share the page. Interact with us. We have some shorts that come out on each of our episodes every week. We would love to interact with you. So if you got comments, drop them in the comments section. Reach out to James and I, especially if you got questions on the things that we talk about. We can help you with needs assessments or anything else, or help you rap about those types of things. If you want to be a guest, give us a holler because we'd like to have you. If you got something you want to talk about, let us know. But thanks again, and thanks to Veriforce for powering us for so long. We really appreciate your support and getting the word out there on risk and occupational health and safety.
Thank you all for listening, but most of all, thank you for what you do, the role you play in getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs. Till next time, roll tide, out.
Roll Tide.